Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's guest is Lee Matthew Goldberg. Lee has authored 4 novels, including The Desire Card, The Mentor, and Stow Down. His 4th novel is The Ancestor, a brilliant nonstop thriller that leaves readers questioning our identity, heritage, and fate. The Ancestor takes place during an 1898 Alaskan Gold Rush and is a story that will resonate with readers due to our current situation, COVID-19, where life as we know it has changed rapidly. During this time of quarantine and isolation, many have felt the loneliness, separation, and loss of loved ones. And The Ancestor explores the emotional journey of the protagonist who is trying to get back to a life that is familiar. Lee Matthew Goldberg, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Howard. I'm excited to do this.
So I love, just interviewing authors like yourself who have this creative juice flowing. And I have to think it's kind of comes natural because I wrote a nonfiction book and it was painful. It was a subject that I knew very well. And here you are. I mean, the accomplishments of writing these books. For our listeners' benefit, I'd love to have a little bit more of your backstory and how you became a writer. What prompted you to want to sit down and make a career of this?
Yeah, I really have always been a writer. Even since I was a little kid, I would write stories about my dog, and they would wind up being like 100 pages, like crazy adventures that he was getting into. So I always had it within me. And then my senior year in high school, my school had a novel writing class, literally. And I took it, and my teacher, John Byrne, gave me more attention, I think, than the rest of the students. And after I graduated, he worked with me with the book, like over the summer. And he was like, you really have something different that you could make a career out of this if that was something you really thought about. And ever since then, I've just been writing books.
Now, where did you go to school?
I went to Friends Seminary. They're private Quaker schools. And I went there from when I was 4 all through senior year. So it was like kind of a family.
Okay. And when you went on to college, did you pick a university that was known for its literature writing programs?
Yeah, I went to Connecticut College, and they had a great creative writing department headed by Blanche Boyd, who's a writer. And then after that, I got my MFA at the New School back in the city, which has a fantastic MFA program. And I studied with some great writers and teachers.
You know, it's funny. Not many people can sit here, have a conversation, say, I'm doing exactly what I set out to do when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was 5, I went up to my parents and I was like, I want to be a writer. It took longer to get published, like to really get published, than I think I had intended. I'm young, especially in terms of a writer, but my first book came out in 2015 and we had been trying for about 5 years with alternate kind of success for my agent to land the book. But yeah, no, I do what I love, and I try to write every day if I'm working on a project, and I always have a million irons in the fire.
So, some people have a million books on the bedside. You just have a million ideas of a story on the bedside.
I have a million ideas and books in different stages of being done. So I literally have about 8. Some are more done than others. Some are on a last edit that I kind of put down and go back to and put down and go back to.
So with The Ancestor, your most current book, and it's got some great reviews. How does a book like this come to be? What was that spark or that inspiration?
So there's a band called Darlingside. They're a great indie rock band. And they have a song called The Ancestor. And it was wintertime and I heard the song. And the first line is, "Go on, bury me." And I just pictured this man who was buried on ice. And then the book kind of started to evolve from that, where I pictured, well, if he was buried on ice, maybe he was literally frozen in time. And then he wakes up with amnesia. He doesn't remember who he is. And then slowly the memories of his past come back to him, except they're from 120 years in the past from the Alaskan Gold Rush. And whether or not it's true or not, for him it is true. So he believes he's that far away from his family and he has to kind of get back to them. And then what I usually do is I let the book marinate in my head for a few years. The Ancestor has such a wide array of a cast of characters. It's not only about the protagonist. So a lot of those characters needed to kind of fully form before I actually sat down to write the book itself.
That's interesting. And what genre would you put this book in?
Primarily, it's a thriller because he meets a man who looks very similar to him, and he starts to believe that that man is his descendant, literally, would be his great-great-grandson. And the man has a wife and child who remind him of his own wife and child. And then slowly, as he gets to know them, he wants to take the man's wife and child for himself. On first glance, it's really a thriller. It's about somebody sort of taking over somebody else's life. But then so much takes place also during the Alaskan Gold Rush as he remembers sort of his time from then. So it's also historical. And because he's possibly frozen on ice for 120 years, there's an element of supernatural sci-fi. What allowed him to be frozen for that amount of time? Does he have something sort of in his body makeup? So I think it's a book that really bleeds genres. It appealed to a lot of different people.
It's interesting. I live out here in Las Vegas, and 2 weekends ago, I went up about 2 hours north. There's a little town called Beatty, Nevada. Cute little town, but just about 4 miles west, there is a ghost town called Wyatt, and they used to mine some type of minerals there. And I was amazed because many of the buildings were there, and they were in exceptional. There was parts of it were standing, but there's a lot of decay. And in fact, there was even the cemetery there, and there was a woman who was in the cemetery who was well over 100 years old. And always thinking about these stories in that time and in the times of the gold rush and the mining, the exploration, and the stories that take place. And I would imagine, at least here up in Nevada and in your story, the Alaskan Gold Rush, I would imagine that was a very sedentary life, for that miner, leaving his family and going off and trying to strike it rich. And what happened with your protagonist? Why was he doing what he was doing?
Well, so the Alaskan Gold Rush took place quite many years after the California one. So a lot of it was seeing sort of the success of people who maybe struck big. And then as things started to bubble in Alaska, a lot of people were like, I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to take the chance because, things were kind of booming out there for a few years in Alaska. For my character, the narrator's son is quite sick. He has a disease that, at least at that time, nobody could kind of pinpoint. He just runs very cold all the time. They really don't have the money for doctors and for helping him medically. So my protagonist, Wyatt, he really leaves to kind of save his son potentially. But he's also an adventurer at heart. So half of it is really saying, yes, it's for my family, but it's also something in his sort of restless spirit that he wants to kind of see for himself. And the difference really between the California Gold Rush and the Alaskan Gold Rush was the Alaskan Gold Rush was so perilous. The terrain that a lot of these prospectors were crossing, very different than in California, and a lot of people perished due to sort of the freezing temperatures. So it was really taking a chance on your life to go, and it changes him as a person, what he has to do to kind of get ahead there and the terrible things he sees while he is going on that adventure.
Yeah, I would imagine it was not a pretty time, just in terms of what you see or have to do to survive.
Yeah, you also had a lot of people sort of middle-aged coming out of the Wild Wild West that were still searching for that type of adventure. So they sort of migrated from that era and moved towards Alaska in the hunt and pursuit of gold. But they had this very sort of, outlaw spirit to them. And, if they had to kind of get rid of somebody to get ahead, that was something that they did. So he encounters a lot of those people as well that really have sort of a greedy lust of gold in their eyes.
Sure. And I'm curious, how much research, you mentioned earlier the book, the idea, how it came about with the band Darling Side. How does this book, as it's percolating in you, maybe do you take notes you have a notebook, or where are you starting to accumulate the ideas for the book, getting them out of your head, or where do you put them?
Yeah, I definitely have a notebook for each book, and sort of as big ideas come into my head, I'll jot them down. For a while, though, I kind of like to almost not write anything. I just like to let the ideas kind of marinate for a little bit. And then what I do when I'm ready really to start writing it, I'll do like a full outline. So this one was a chapter-to-chapter outline, kind of a paragraph per chapter. So that way when I was sitting down to write, I already knew the direction of where I was headed for the day. And then I usually allow myself to be open if I want to change anything. So what winds up happening is around like midway to 2/3 in the outline, the book kind of starts taking on its own life and mutates, and I allow it to go in the direction that it really should intend to go, rather than just stick, solely to that outline. But I find it's a big help too. And I almost think of it as sort of like either a movie or a TV series. Each chapter is an episode or kind of something like that to help me kind of visualize it.
So I have a question, and it may come across as unusual. Maybe you've heard this before, but as at the point the book starts to take on a life of its own, who do you become?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I've never sort of heard it put that way before. But you become an active participant. Obviously, you're the writer. But there's also a passiveness too, where you have to kind of step back and allow the book to kind of take on its own. I remember hearing an interview with the writer Wally Lamb, great writer who wrote, She's Come Undone, and I Know This Much Is True. And he was saying that he woke up one morning just with the realization that a character he hadn't intended to kill had to die. And he almost wept because, it was literally kind of dealing with a loss, but it had to happen for the book. And I find that happens a lot too. Like there are characters who die at the end that I hadn't intended. And the ending in particular was not always the way that it was going to end. So I almost had to kind of take a step back and look at it from an outside perspective to allow the book to really kind of flourish as much as it could possibly.
When you're writing a book like this, do you set aside, some time during the day? Do you have a specific place that you write? How do these ideas, percolating in you, how does that best then become words on a piece of paper?
I'm usually pretty sort of standard. I'll edit in the morning what I worked on the day before, and take like a lunch break or like a workout break, and then I'll write all afternoon. And then maybe at nighttime I'll pick at it a little bit. The main thrust of it is sort of around 1 to 5 in the afternoon. When the weather's nice, I write every day in Central Park. I have a tree that's sort of perfectly fits my back, and I've been writing there for about 10 years. So I'll go there as much as possible. The Ancestor in particular, because it was written in the wintertime, I was not able to go, sit in the snow in Central Park. So a lot of that was written either in my apartment, or there's the main library in Manhattan on 42nd Street, with the lion statues. It has an amazing quiet room. So a lot of it was written during then. It was a very, very, very cold winter as well. And so that really helped sort of get a feel of Alaska and sort of the frigidness that all my characters were experiencing as well.
So this now prompts two questions for me. Well, one is a request, Lee, is I would love a picture of the tree in Central Park.
Oh, totally. I can send it. I have plenty. Yeah.
Excellent. And I would love, this shot of the library.
Okay.
Because we'll put that in our show notes on Success Insight podcast website. We'll have a picture of the cover of your book.
I have a great picture that I took. They had put masks over the lions about a month ago. So I'll send you that one. It's a really, really great shot.
Fantastic. And especially the tree. I did an interview. God, it seems so long ago. It's probably, God, was it earlier in the year? Maybe it was late last year. It was, I had a lot of children's book authors that I was working with, and they all talked about the reading chair. In a classroom, there was always the reading chair where the teacher would sit down and the kids would gather around. But I love the idea of the writing tree. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, I live in Midtown, so it's so chaotic all the time. And I find Central Park just allows me to kind of like breathe almost. So I've been drawn to it for many, many years. And I have a bunch of spots in Central Park, but that's my primary spot. Every once in a while, somebody's at that tree. If I go, I don't literally own it. So I have other options, but all my books in some form have been either edited or written at that tree. Yeah.
Do you think the quality of your writing that particular day changes because you're not actually at that tree?
Well, these days there's a bunch of other spots that now I've been working at for a good amount of time. And especially now, I haven't been taking the subway. So I'll walk to Central Park. It's like a 2.5 mile walk. Mm-hmm. So there's some days where I just don't feel like going that far. So I'll go kind of closer in the park, like around 59th Street. And it's, not as good, but it suffices. But yeah, there's something about that tree that's just like, a little magical, I guess, that I just do my best work at. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's where the magic happens. I love it. You know, the other question that came to mind as you were talking about, you know, the weather in Alaska in this particular year, 1898 or so. How much research do you do for a book like this to help inform how your writing is going to kind of get fleshed out?
This one was the most research I had ever done for a book. I've written a book that took place in the 1980s and the 1990s. But I lived through them, even though I was a little kid. I remembered enough of it that there was research, but it wasn't like this. I mean, about 70 pages take place in the 1890s. So I really wanted to make sure I was fully capturing the era. So I read a ton of books about the Alaskan Gold Rush. I watched a ton of documentaries. And also just about Alaska in general. I wasn't able to go to Alaska to write the book, and I almost didn't want to. The book takes place in a fictional town, so I didn't want it to be too colored by, sort of firsthand research. But I had spent a lot of time in like Scandinavia, and I certainly, like I said, that winter in New York, it was under 20 degrees a lot of days. So I felt it was enough to kind of capture the sort of the spirit of it. I had initially intended to do like a little book tour in Alaska. Obviously with COVID, that was kind of, sidelined, but it might be something in 2021 that I would kind of reestablish and do, just so I could see sort of what I was writing about.
We can get you set up with some virtual book tours for Alaska,
That would be amazing. I would love that. I really would love that.
Definitely. So a question now with your protagonist, Wyatt, and the book in general, and for the reader, what lessons or insights do you want them to take away from this experience? Either, again, you got the protagonist, Wyatt, his lessons, and then for the reader themselves who are consuming this book, what are those lessons and insights?
Yeah, I mean, the book is, I think, twofold, really about sort of loss and identity. Literally, for my protagonist, he loses his identity. He has to search for it again. The issue for him, though, is he's building a new life in the present while slowly his past starts coming back and infiltrating that new life and the kind of bad things he may have done in his past. So a lot of it sort of asks, who we are and are we a makeup of our memories and our past, or, or bad experiences that we've had, or are we a product of a sort of, who we are now and sort of every day who we become. Another huge kind of influence that happened during this book is my father passed away the winter that I was writing it. So the idea of sort of death and loss is a huge, huge part of the book. And even though it would have always been, it was accelerated, obviously, because of what I was going through. So for a lot of the characters, they're dealing with some type of loss and how they're able to move on after it. When you lose somebody, you're almost kind of, stunned or stunted, that it's very hard to sort of imagine a life without them, how you kind of move on day to day. But, ultimately, you have to live and you have to move on. So a lot of the book is sort of how, you're able to deal with that. And I hope readers reading it touches them sort of in that way if they've experienced sort of a very traumatic loss as well.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of fiction writers, and some of the books are like, okay, that's interesting, and I've had the pleasure of, especially during the holidays, picking the ones I want to read and thinking, my God, that would be a great movie or a television show or something.
Yes.
I guess I could ask, what's your vision for this? I mean, what's next? Is this, because this speaks to being a movie.
Absolutely. So I've written it actually also. I've done a lot of screenwriting before. So I've written it as a TV pilot. I think it's a little bigger than a film, that because of the sort of cast of supporting characters. So it works sort of better as a TV series. So I've written it as a pilot. And then a few weeks ago, my literary agent got it to a very big Hollywood agent who really, really loved the book and also saw it as a TV series. So right now, we're sort of at that stage with it. There's a big agent that likes it. For him, I know that he wants a bigger screenwriter to sort of take on the project that I'm just not there in my career yet to sell a show. So the next step, sort of, I think post Labor Day, would be to send the book out to sort of showrunners and creative in Hollywood, and hopefully it takes. The exciting thing is I've been promised that no matter what, I would be a part of it. So even though it wouldn't be my show, I would potentially be like in the writer's room and everything. So it's really exciting if it winds up happening.
Fantastic. And in the spirit of full disclosure to you, Lee, and to my listeners, I did not see this question. Okay. This was not in the show notes or the prep notes for this podcast. I was just...
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm glad to hear that it has sort of that scope. Yeah, this happened sort of really recently, and I've had experiences with Hollywood before. One of my books was optioned, and then the project kind of fell apart. So I take it all with a grain of salt. But this one feels like there's sort of more kind of potential chatter and buzz around it. So fingers crossed, it becomes a Netflix show.
Most definitely. Well, this actually brings up some other questions. Besides this book, and you said early on, you have a lot of other books, percolating, and you've got your notebooks. What is your life like when you're not researching, writing for a book? What else is going on in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of working on a book in some way, shape, or form. So it's always a huge part of life. I think I also live in New York City, so whether it's going out, restaurants, museums, concerts in normal times. So that's a big part of my life. And I love to travel too. So, in different times, especially in the summer, I usually would be gone somewhere and kind of taking off. In COVID times, your life gets a little smaller. So it's been a lot of just kind of being in the neighborhood, seeing people occasionally, a lot of reading, a lot of movie watching, and a lot of just, I don't know, it kind of has all just kind of gone by so fast randomly.
Yeah. Well, trust me, as you get older, it goes by even faster. What type of coaching and mentoring do you do today? Because you had two mentors, you in high school and again in college, people that influenced you. What is that like today for you? Because I could imagine, you're a successful author, you're published, and heck, you even have an author that's being a book that's being optioned for Hollywood.
Hopefully.
Okay. I don't want to jinx it. Hopefully. How do you give back to the 17-year-old kid that was you that wants to be a writer? How are you giving back today?
For about 10 years, up until about a year or two ago, I was teaching as an adjunct professor, whether it was writing, English, fiction writing, essay writing. So I did that for about 10 years. Majority of my students were 18, 19, freshmen, sophomores at various colleges. And I loved it. I almost just decided to take a little break from it, but it's something I'd like to completely go back to. I would like to do it on a graduate level. I think it's where I could really help the most. So working with fiction writers that already are not established, but should be sort of reaching that level and kind of pushing them over the finish line in terms of it. So another goal of mine sort of after, COVID and when things kind of get back to normal a little bit is to do like maybe a class a semester at the graduate level, kind of give back that way.
Fantastic. And what advice do you give or would you give to someone that inspiration is just starting to get ignited? What kind of what kind of advice would you give to that individual?
Yeah, I would say just like nurture it as much as possible. Find people in your life that you could kind of give your work to that I think will, be kind, but also be very honest. It's a very, very, very tough career. It's very tough to kind of break into it. There's so much rejection. And I think it's important that somebody's aware of sort of what befalls them in terms of this career as well. But on the flip side, never take no. My first book was rejected by everybody. The Ancestor was rejected by 1 million people too, till it found its right home. So the rejection sort of never stops. And you have to just, be confident that if you're really talented, that you really only need one yes. And then that can kind of propel you along.
And working with an agent, what was that like?
Yeah, so I've been with my agent for about 10 years. And what's great is that there's a real friendship there just because I know him so well. So it's different than I think some other people's sort of, client-agent relationship where we can kind of say anything to each other. And I think, finding a good agent is really finding somebody you could trust. That's not just looking necessarily at one book, but your sort of whole career. And with that, it's really just finding somebody that you really kind of gel with and, sees the vision of your career in the same way that you do. But the agent at the beginning really becomes your first editor. They're, cutting and slashing a lot of the book and making it sort of into its best possible book before it gets sent to on submission.
And as you continue down this road as an author, a novelist, how do you continue to grow and evolve?
I want to move in a very sort of Hollywood direction, because it's a lot more money. And
okay.
You really don't make a lot as a fiction writer. It's especially living in New York City, it makes it quite difficult. And I love film and I love television. I'm very influenced by it as well. So my goal is really to have all my books be, books and sort of projects in Hollywood too. So, a big goal of mine is to get a Hollywood agent. So hopefully this person that I'll be working with, that transitions into that as well. And then always just challenging myself as a writer too. I have a sci-fi book coming out next year in March, which is a departure for me. And I like really kind of challenging myself and doing different things. The sci-fi book is something I've been working on for about 15 years. So it's a really kind of slow process for that one. But it was different because you're building a whole new world. So it just took me a really long time to do that. Where the Ancestor, when I sat down to write it, was written in 6 months. It just was faster.
That begs the question is, if you've got all of a handful of books, a lot of books in various stages, how difficult is it to turn off one book and start working on another, turn it off, go work on another for you?
Yeah, I mean, for example, the sci-fi book, because I've been working on it for so long, it always just felt like a second home. So it's very easy to just pick up and do a new edit. And I would do that where like once every year or two, I would pick it up again. And it kind of was like that book for me. When I'm really into a book, like when I was writing The Ancestor, I didn't do anything else, writing wise. Like that was my sole focus. So definitely for like that first edit, that first draft, I don't allow myself to work on a bunch of projects at once. It's when I get into like sort of the deeper editing process that I could put something down and pick something up. And oftentimes I'll write a book and then I'll write a script kind of in between. So I'm not doing two novels kind of back to back. And it's almost like a palate cleanser for me.
Excellent. And when you're not writing, and I've already asked you about, well, what else do you like to do? And you're in New York, so I'm sure there's deli and bagels, obviously Central Park, and you're getting exercise because you're walking a couple miles.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's what I need. That's why I moved to Las Vegas, so I can exercise more. What other organizations are you a part of that help to kind of nurture and feed your creative self? It's obviously it's probably virtual versus in person these days, but what are some of those places? I
mean, most of my books have thriller elements, so I'm a part of the majority of sort of mystery and thriller organizations. And really one of my favorite things to do is to go to the convention. So like a BoucherCon, which is sort of the biggest thriller convention every year. There's Left Coast Crime. I was planning on going to Killer Nashville this year. There's one in Boston I'm forgetting the name of that I was going to go to. So a huge part of what 2020 was going to be for me was, maybe once a month heading out of town to go to these conventions. And they're fantastic because you just meet with so many great writers and you meet so many cool people and you talk the craft and you do panels. So it's something that I had started doing and that I look forward to continuing to do when we're able to do that again.
Fantastic. Lee, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
So the best place is my website, which is my name, LeeMatthewGoldberg.com. And that has information about all my books and press and potential events that I'm doing. I'm also on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Lee Matthew G, Instagram, I'm Lee Matthew Goldberg. You can find me on Facebook as well. And I love to interact with readers. So if you like the book or even if you hated it, I'd love to hear from you and potentially why, and get a dialogue about that.
Fantastic. And we will most certainly provide the backlinks to the website, leematthewgoldberg.com, as well as your social sites, and including the book page on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Success Insight podcast. I am really excited about your book. And the beauty of what I do is I do have a certain amount of downtime, just given my work schedule. So I'm really excited about the Ancestor. I'm not going to wait till the holidays for it, but just really great work, and just keep it up. And just I'm envious. Go please have a good bagel or a deli sandwich for me, because you're in New York and I'm like totally, I love where I am, but I'm envious where you are.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Howard. And this was a blast to do. And I'm going to go get a bagel right now for you.
Fantastic. And as my girlfriend would say, you got to core it out because you don't want the dough, which was actually really good. So, folks, we've just been chatting with Lee Matthew Goldberg. He's the author of 4 novels, The Desire Card, The Mentor, and Stow Down. And his 4th novel, which we have just spent a fair amount of time discussing, is really this brilliant nonstop thriller. It's called The Ancestor, and it questions our identity, our heritage, our fate. And there's some historical context, the 1898 Gold Rush. And really, how does this individual who's suddenly woken up, how does he come to some type of new reality based on, who he was and who he is today? So do go out and, pick up a copy of The Ancestor. Also, go and visit Lee's website, leematthewgoldberg.com. And we'll also provide, in addition to links to their Twitter, to Facebook and Instagram, where Lee also has a presence. And he just gave you that invitation. If you're interested in writing, you want to learn more about Lee and the work he's doing, reach out to him. That's a great invitation, and we appreciate that. Folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, please let us know. SuccessInsightPodcast.com. You can add a comment there. You can follow us on SuccessInsightPodcast.com. We are on Facebook and on LinkedIn, SuccessInsightPodcast.com, as well as the major podcasting platforms, as well as YouTube. So lots of opportunity to let us know your thoughts on this particular episode with Lee, as well as our episodes in general. And folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Please wear your mask, practice safe distancing, and hey, we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.